Yeah, my first road trip as a manager with a band signed to a label, the first place I went to was Halifax.
In this very special episode of the 8th podcast, we are discussing the Tragically Hip No Dress Rehearsal, a new 4-part documentary for Amazon Prime. We were lucky enough to speak to the director, Mike Downie, and the exec producer, Jake Gold. The Tragically Hip No Dress Rehearsal features candid behind-the-scenes archive from across the decades and captures the voices of some of Canada's biggest stars and the emotional connection they have to the music. The documentary will be screening at the festival, and director and exec producer Mike and Jake will both be attending.
We've done a few of these, but Mike and I, if you haven't seen the film yet or the series, but I signed the band with my partner Alan Gregg back in '86, and I managed them for 17 years, and then we split, and then I came back into the picture in 2020 after Gord's passing, and basically to look after the legacy and keep the thing going. And one of the things that was important was telling this band's story. There had been a documentary telling the story of the final tour, but never really the story from the band from way back when and from the beginning. And Mike, having had tons and tons of experience making documentary films, and actually had made his first documentary with the band back in 1993, it was sort of a natural. And Mike contacted me when I came back in and said, we got to do this. And I said, you're right. And I went to the band and said, okay, we want to make this documentary. Mike wants to do it. And I think the band felt trust and comfort and knew that Mike would make something of quality. And I think that was important to them, that they could trust the person that they were working with to tell their story. So that's really how it came about. This was back in 2020. So then we went about, Mike and his team put together the pitch and the pitch document. And we went around talking to people, and the people at Prime in LA were the most excited about it. And also were the ones that basically said, you make your film. I remember we were sitting here one night, the two main guys out of Los Angeles were in town. They came over to where I am now. We sat on my terrace with Mike, the four of us, and they said, look, we want you to make your film. We're not interested in getting in the middle of any of this stuff, but you make your film. And that was probably, besides the fact that they were going to, finance a pretty large project, when you think about 4 1-hours and tons of music clearances and, tons of footage and licensing of all that footage for all those years. We're almost talking 40 years of stuff. The fact that they, on the creative side, were willing to let Mike do his thing, I think was the tipping point for us to go, yeah, like these are the guys we have to go with. Because Mike's made a lot of docs over the years, and he can fill you in on the difference between someone letting you sort of complete your vision versus someone having their hands in every single frame that you do. So,
Mike, obviously this band is an institution and means so many things to so many people. In terms of your vision, where did you start?
The thing about this story is, obviously, having lived it, and really from those first conversations, I sketched out 4 episodes. It just made sense to me. Like I could sort of see this almost like on a graph of all things. But, the early, build the rocket. Episode 1, rocket takes off, gets into, outer space. Episode 2, rocket gets bumpy, episode 3, I don't know what episode 4 is. It lands, but I could
It's a
just see that
crash landing. Let's just call it that.
when I just started, from our first conversation, I saw 4 episodes. These kind of things, you have a decision. Is it going to be a linear storytelling, or are we going to, move things around? And we did a little bit in the first episode and the 4th episode, but I kind of felt that their story is so strong. Like, you just needed to, don't get in the way. Like, tell it as best as you can, as accurately as you can, as honestly as you can. And this was another part of the early conversation with Jake and I and the band, which was, this has to be the full story, warts and all. This has to be all the things that, obviously weren't a part of the storytelling while the band was, doing, like, releasing records and doing all these great things, because these were more personal, some of the inner workings of the band. And so, you put all that together, and for me, it was just so clear that, just tell this story with honesty, with emotion. And, the lead singer is my brother. That could be a hindrance, or that could be, a real advantage. And we were very clear that we were going to make this an advantage. In other words, there's nothing that I can't hear about my brother. Like, you don't need to edit yourself. And I think in many ways it ended up working the way that we had hoped, which was people were really honest. There weren't, if there was something that was maybe, sensitive, well, they're telling it, the director of the film is asking the question, but they're answering it to, if it's about Gord, they're answering it to his brother. So there's no, like, question about, is this something that isn't appropriate. So yeah, I think that, there's so many things about this band that, when you look at their story, and, I've done a lot of documentaries, and often you get really good story elements, but you have to kind of work with them a little bit. For example, you have 5 guys in a band, 4 of them go to the same high school, but then you just kind of don't mention that one went to the other high school. But all 5 went to the same high school. They were all there at the same time. Like, it's, and the way that the band sort of, these 2 high school bands sort of merged and sort of created this university band, the Tragically Hip, all these elements were there. And you really didn't need to, there was no massaging required. When they went to get management, they got Alan Gregg and Jake Gold, like an incredible, duo from Toronto. We're small town guys. These are big city guys, like, all the elements were there. So it really was, like, don't overthink it. Tell a good story, tell it as, accurately, tell it openly and honestly. And that's what we did.
Mike's whole family's in it, his 2 sisters and his brother and his mom, for that matter. Getting them to be really open and honest, I think, was a lot easier for them, with knowing they're talking to their brother. So they're talking to the guy that they'd be telling the same thing whether the cameras were on or not. And I think that's a really important part of this story. And I think it was an important part of the story even with the guys, because the guys grew up with Mike too.
I kind of felt like you did an amazing job depicting and making me feel as a viewer like I was kind of going to Kingston during that era, the high school scene, the way you used the archive from the time, and in terms of photos and video. And I kind of felt like Kingston was a real character in that first episode.
Yeah, that's it. Kingston is a character and needed to be a character in the documentary. And I would take it a little further. That first episode is a love letter to Kingston. And there are some elements in there that that there were, notes that came back, and maybe a little too much, Kingston. but it needed to be so much that we established in the first episode comes back. It's really, the storytelling is circular, and it's going to blow your mind, I think, by the time you get to the end of episode 4, just how circular the story is. I can't say it any better than Dan Aykroyd. Oh, Kingston, yeah, that town down the 401 between Toronto and Montreal. No, that's the town that built the Tragically Hip. And, it's true. It's true. And also, I think, and it comes up in a few of the clips, it is also meant to be, in many ways, an homage to small town life, because, listen, this Toronto is a great city. Halifax, a great city. So many of, the people that end up calling it home come from somewhere else. And they bring with them, I think in many cases, these lessons and these strengths that they learned in what would you say, the safety or the, from a small town, from that stuff. So yeah, absolutely essential in that first episode.
You mentioned Dan Aykroyd. One of the things that I loved was the people like, Will Arnett. You had Justin Trudeau. You had these Canadian icons who were willing to talk emotionally, and I felt like I kind of got the impression that it wasn't hard to get them to talk. But tell me, when you kind of initially said we were going to do this and you started reaching out to people, what kind of reaction did you get?
Yeah, well, it was very positive. Yeah, we definitely, when it came to, the celebrity interviews, if you will, we definitely did not try to cast it to have, for that celebrity quotient, if you will. They all had relationships with the band. The funny thing is their relationships there was two kind of relationships, because Dan Aykroyd is very, very good friends with all the guys in the band, and especially Johnny. They're very close. But Will Arnett, Jay Baruchel were super fans of the band that never met, that went to multiple shows and never met the band, which really blew my mind. And I didn't realize the depth of their love until we interviewed them. And but it kind of made sense. Will Arnett described he first moved to New York, and he would go see the Hip shows, and it was his connection back to Toronto, back to Canada, because there'd be other Canadians there, and his friends would fly down from Toronto as well. So it was kind of like a homecoming that the Hip were sort of facilitating, and the same thing when he moved to LA. So his emotion is, as somebody who was really touched by the music, but it goes way deeper, because it really, for his, living in the States for all these years, it was one of the, umbilical cords that, sort of kept him connected to Canada.
And Jay, we were working with a director for the video for Ouch, of a song that we found when I came back in, and Jay was cast as the main character in the video, although we had never met him. But when we went to issue the press release about the video coming out, we asked him for a quote, and he tells the story about his first concert was seeing the Hip at the Bell Center in 1995. And you're like, wow, like, I didn't know that. Like, we just cast him as to play in the video. And then we realized, oh, this guy's a real fan. And so when Mike and I were talking about people, I said, oh, you've got to talk to Jay, because he's like a real fan and he's got a connection to the band. But again, never met the band. In fact, I think on Thursday will be the first time, next Thursday will be the first time he's going to meet the band at the premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival, which is so odd when you think about it,
To come back to the archive, and obviously the wealth of documentary work you had already done with the band, Mike, and photos and these kind of behind the scenes and on the road, how did you approach that kind of must be a huge archive that you have to sift through to tell a story. Was that, I guess it was emotionally charged, but also it was a logistical task in terms of sorting what you wanted to tell the story, I guess.
So one of the first things when I came back in is I called a friend of mine who does basically what I do, but he does it for the Beatles. And I had called him and said, okay, you know, and he also was a guy that worked with the band, and he was our marketing guy at MCA Records for our first 2 records. And I called him up right when I first came back in, and I said, okay, what advice would you give me? He goes, first figure out what you got, then you'll know what to do with it. So the first step was we needed to digitize all the music because so much of it was sitting on 1/4-inch, 1/2-inch cassette, 24-track tapes. So I went to the record company and we made a deal that they were going to digitize everything. And then I brought in this company that is a specialist in building archives. And they're out of Boston, and they do tons and tons of really big artists. And they literally go into, they had just finished doing Rush's archive and, Def Leppard and, you name it. And that's their specialty. And they work with professional archivists, and they literally come into your house or your storage lockers and they just grab everything. And then they start to scan it and organize it and build it. So that was almost a year process. But the beauty of it, and that was just ephemera. That was not video or audio. So we had the record company doing audio and a little bit of video that was found, and these guys were doing the ephemera, and you name it, like every photo, every newspaper article, every contract, like boxes and boxes of stuff. And so what they did is they built a digital version of it. So Mike's team could literally year by year or by idea, it's like, oh, we're looking for a ticket stub. Oh, you search ticket stubs and all the ticket stubs come up, and but they also built the physical version, and that sits in a secure 2 rooms in the west end of the city. So if they found something online that they wanted to use, they could go and pull it and know exactly where it was, because the online version was barcoded to be able to access the physical version. So they could pull it and shoot it and everything else. So this was all happening at the same time, which made it really easy for everybody to work with. And so now we're sitting with this giant archive, physical, but we also still have the digital version up there because we have other projects that we're doing. We have a book coming out that really came from all the transcripts from the documentary of the band telling the story in their words. And so we were able to use that archive for a lot of things, and the value of it was indispensable, to say the least. Mike can talk about some of the great video finds and some of the ones that he didn't find, because those are as interesting as the ones you find.
Yeah. And that this started. I was so aware of what had been done over the years, having done some of it myself, a few music videos, earlier documentary that Jake mentioned. But we were also really aware of all the other things that happened. So there was just a constant, reaching out to different filmmakers who had done, some cases, music videos. Don Allen from Revolver did, a CBC special in 1992. They followed the band around for, I think, almost 18 months, Jake. And they went with them to the States. So when you see them in the van, that was shot by Don Allen, Sean Valentini, the DP, and Pete Henderson, a really well-known director. And it was a treasure trove. We had full access to that. They also shot it on 16 millimeter film. And that was a time where for the special they were doing, it would have been shot on beta. It would have been on video for sure. And they went the extra mile and shot it on film. We ended up eventually tracking down all the film cans that we were able to get at. And but then there were other pieces. There's an amazing bit of footage that a real hip fan, Andrew, tracked down. It's backstage at Bishop's University. Somehow we got to the bar manager of Bishop's University in like 1986. He lives in California. And he had filmed that they're all hanging out. Johnny talks right to camera, what are you looking at or something? And we actually tracked this guy down, Andrew did. And he still had the tape. He's in the film business. It had been carefully stored. And that was just another find. And then, Don Smith, who produced the first two records, was a bit of a shutterbug himself. So he had a video camera in the studio with the band. In Memphis, it was Jake was the cameraman because he had it. And you remember, video cameras this was not a household item back then. This was a specialty, expensive, piece of equipment. And Jake and Alan took a camera down with him. And Alan Gregg had put all of his archive into the Queen's archive a number of years ago. And in my conversation with him, said, you can get a list of everything I put in there. There's some good stuff in there. Sure enough, there's a videotape. And that's the videotape from them recording their first record in Memphis. So like that kind of, it's one thing, you got these great stories, but if you don't have the material to back them up to create the time travel, it's really limited. You end up with, talking heads, or, you end up with, you're kind of borrowing from other places to make, whatever, close enough, so to speak. And yet time and time again, especially in those first early records, somebody had a camera rolling. And so those were just, incredible finds. And then the one that the first call that I made when we started talking about doing this documentary was my best friend, who was a real video nut back in the 80s. And he worked at a camera store in Kingston, Hugh Douglas Murray. And he could sign out a video camera anytime he wanted. And he shot a few really, really early gigs of the band. So I called Hugh and I said, "Hey, Hugh, it's time to get that box of tapes out of the basement." And he said, Oh, I lost those years ago. They're all gone. I'm like, "You're kidding." It's like, "Yeah, I lost them in a move." And I'm like, "Oh, fuck." But you know what? He actually took he took some amazing stills, and he still have the envelope. Right. These documentaries, they live and die on the archive.
What feeling or what emotions and kind of understanding do you want people to walk away from once they finish the entire film? What was your intention for them to kind of have left behind in them?
Well, I would say, there's a few different categories of people that we had in mind when we were making the film. Certainly three. Hardcore fan, which we're very familiar with, a lot of them. Casual fan, or just regular fan, if you will. And then the non-fan, that either on somebody on the other side of the world or somebody who generationally missed it. And so we kind of wanted all of them to have something that they were going to connect with, and I think we managed to do that. For the hardcore fan, I think we remind them, this really was special. Like what you experienced, your devotion was well warranted. Like it's all there now that deeper stories. And then I think it's a reminder to the regular fan, casual fan, that this was a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And good that, and now you maybe realized there was a lot going on there. There's a reason why this band was meaning so much. And there's a reason why the Canadian reaction to Gord's illness and death was so dramatic. Because this story is so dramatic and so unique and so uniquely Canadian. And then for the the next generation of fans, it really, I hope, is it's the same kind of message. It's like, here's a story that on its own, it is a really great story. It's it's iconic, practically. Small town taking on you name it, going around, seeing the world and all of that. Oh, by the way, the music's fantastic. So yeah, really interesting story, interesting music. Oh, and the music doesn't really fit into a genre or a time. It actually doesn't. This is, one of the things that, I guess it helped the band or hindered them at times, because they weren't a part of a blossoming, genre. There's one other thing. Their live performance is legendary. So, like, for the non-fan, there's a lot in there to digest. And I'm most excited about, it's one thing to say, well, what song should I listen to? If I'm talking to somebody on the other side of the world, or someone who's just come upon it, and it's like, well, that's tough. There's 14 studio albums, Jake. There's so much material. So now I hope it's like, well, why don't you watch a couple of episodes of this documentary, and then you go off on your own. Then you go and you find the music that really connects with you, because you are going to find a lot of music and a lot of diversity and something for everybody, really. So yeah, I'm really excited about getting the hardcore fans, them getting off, getting the casual fans reawaken, wake up to what they experienced, and then for the new fans, they're the luckiest of all, because it's all in front of them. So,
and part of it was, when you think about the final show in Kingston in 2016, there was 11,000 homes watched it, but probably another couple of 11 million, probably a couple of more million in town squares, and then another million in bars and places like that, which don't count. And then you got another million streamed it around the world. That was a generational, it was soup to nuts. You had 12-year-olds watching it with their parents and their grandparents. And those 12-year-old kids remember they experienced something special, but they weren't as connected to the music. Well, now fast forward 8 years later, they're 20. And they're like, oh, I remember that night. I remember that event. I remember experiencing my family huddled together to watch this, and the sort of emotional response from everybody watching it. Now I have a chance to kind of understand why, because I didn't really know why. I was 11, 12 years old at the time. And I think that's kind of, at least in this country, who we were saying to, like, hey, this is why. This is again back to the initial intent, which was, why this band, why this country. Well, this is why. This is why you saw what you did when you were 11 and 12 years old. Here's why, and here's why all of that happened that night. And the doc doesn't end that night, obviously. It continues beyond. But it was important for us to be able to let people see the why.
So how does it feel to be bringing the Tragically Hip No Dress Rehearsal to AIFE this September?
It goes without saying that we're really excited to be coming to Halifax. Like, we've set these film festivals up. It's a bit like, and I did get to go out on tour with the band back in '93 for a while, but it really feels really appropriate to be taking this film, to the different parts of the country, and getting people fired up. And, just like the band did for all those years, like just like they did at the Misty Moon, 1990, in Halifax. And we're really grateful that AIFF programmed all 4 episodes. It means, Jake and I and Bryn Hughes are coming out to Halifax, and we're really excited about it. So we're very grateful for.
Yeah, my first road trip as a manager with a band signed to a label, the first place I went to was Halifax, and we played a club called the Network. And back then you would come and play for a week at a club. And so that was my first foray into being on the road as a manager with a band signed, was a week in Halifax. So there's always been a really special place for us. And like Mike says, we're kind of taking the show on the road, because we go Halifax, and the next week we go to Calgary, and a couple of weeks later we go to Vancouver, and then we go to Windsor. So we're doing our best to cover the country.
No, that's amazing. I know that this film will be a highlight of the week of production and everything. So thank you so much for your time and joining us. And hopefully I'll bump into you at the festival. It'll be amazing to see you all in Halifax.
Yeah.
It was nice to meet you.
Thank you for listening to the 2024 Atlantic International Film Festival podcast. You can find out more about the events and book tickets by visiting atlanticfilmfestival.ca. I've been Rhys Waters. Now go watch a movie.